On the morning of March 10th, 2023, three young males walked into the most famous territory in the Serengeti. They were not passing through. They were not lost. They had spent 3 months studying the borders, memorizing the patrol routes, and waiting for the exact moment when the king would be alone. The lion they came for had ruled the eastern Serengeti for 7 years. He had survived exile. He had survived starvation. He had survived a coordinated attack from 4 killers who wanted his throne. Photographers called him the Fabio of the lion world. Tourists flew from 3 continents just to sit in a vehicle and watch him walk. His mane was so dark and so perfect that guides said he looked like he had been designed rather than born. His name was Bob Jr., son of Bob Marley, the lion with dreadlocks who had dominated this same territory for a decade before him. 2 generations of kings on the same land, a dynasty built on strength, beauty, and a refusal to surrender. But on that Saturday morning, the dynasty ended. And the way it ended changed every guide, every researcher, and every tourist who had ever whispered his name. Stay until the end to see how the king of the Serengeti died. It was not how anyone expected. Before there was a king, there was a legend. In the early 2000s, a male lion appeared in the Namiri Plains of the eastern Serengeti with a mane so dark and tangled that the guides who first saw him stopped their vehicles and stared. His fur twisted into thick ropes that hung from his neck like cables. He looked nothing like the golden-maned males that ruled the central grasslands. He looked like something older, something wilder. The guides named him Bob Marley. Not because he was gentle, because his mane carried dreadlocks that moved with the wind the way the musician's hair moved on stage. Bob Marley was not born in the Namiri Plains. He arrived as a nomad, walking alone across the open savanna from the central Serengeti. No coalition, no brother at his side, just a single male with a black mane and a stride that told every lion watching that he was not looking for permission. He was looking for a throne. He found one. The Namiri Plains stretch across a vast corridor of grassland east of Seronera, where the wildebeest migration funnels millions of animals through bottlenecks of green and gold. The territory is one of the richest in the entire Serengeti. Buffalo herds, zebra columns, wildebeest by the thousands. Any lion who controls Namiri controls an empire of meat. And Bob Marley took it with nothing but his size and his refusal to back down. He was joined by another male, a blonde-maned lion the guides called Ziggy. Together the pair formed a coalition of 2, Bob Marley and Ziggy. The names fit so well that researchers stopped using ID numbers and started using the nicknames in their field notes. From 2008 to 2018, the 2 males split their time between the Namiri Pride and the Kibumbu Pride, 15 kilometers apart. Combined, the 2 prides held over 60 members. A super pride, one of the largest ever documented in the Serengeti. Bob Marley survived things that should have killed him. In August 2009, 5 young males known as the Killers ambushed him in a gang attack. 5 against 1, he fought his way out. Rangers found him the next morning covered in blood, limping with bite wounds across his spine and shoulders. Any other lion would have disappeared into the bush to die alone. Bob Marley walked back to his pride the same afternoon and lay down next to his females as if nothing had happened. He ruled for over a decade. He sired dozens of cubs across multiple prides. His genetics spread through the eastern Serengeti like a signature written in dark fur and heavy bone. The guides at Namiri Plains camp said they could identify his offspring from 100 meters away. The mane, the walk, the way they held their heads slightly higher than every other lion on the plain. In 2010, one of his cubs was born in the tall grass near the Samitu Kopias, a male, strong from the first day. The rangers noticed him early because he wandered further from his mother than any of his siblings. He pushed boundaries, he tested limits. He had his father's mane growing in dark at the edges before he was 2 years old. They called him Bob Jr. He grew up in the safest territory in the Serengeti, surrounded by his father's pride, protected by a coalition that no rival had been able to break. He played with his brothers in the shade of the kopjes. He watched his father patrol the borders every evening, roaring into the darkness to remind every lion within 8 kilometers that this land had an owner. But the safety did not last. It never does. A male lion cannot stay in his father's pride forever. The same genetics that made him strong would eventually make him a threat. And in the world of lions, fathers do not make exceptions for sons. In 2014, everything Bob Jr. had ever known was taken from him in a single night. The expulsion happened the way it always happens. No warning, no negotiation. One day, you are part of the pride, sleeping in the shade with your brothers, eating from kills your father brought down. The next day, the same father who protected you since birth looks at you with different eyes. You are no longer a cub. You are competition. And competition in a lion pride ends only one way. Bob Jr. was 4 years old when the pride turned on him. He and 4 of his brothers were driven out together, chased across the open grassland until the roars behind them faded into silence. 5 young males with no territory, no females, no hunting experience beyond the scraps their mothers had shared. The Serengeti does not forgive inexperience. It punishes it with starvation, dehydration, and the teeth of every dominant male whose border you accidentally cross. The 5 brothers moved east. They stayed low. They avoided open ground during the day and traveled at night, following the scent of water and the sound of prey they did not yet know how to catch. Hunting without lionesses is a skill that takes months to learn and many failures to master. The brothers failed more than they succeeded. They ate what they could find. Scraps left behind by hyenas, a warthog too slow to reach its burrow, the rotting remains of a wildebeest calf that had drowned crossing a river 3 days earlier. Then the killing started, not from starvation, from other lions. The eastern Serengeti is controlled by coalitions that do not tolerate young nomads passing through their borders. A nomadic male is a future threat. A group of 5 nomadic males is an immediate one. The dominant coalitions responded the way dominant coalitions always respond. They hunted the brothers down one by one. The first brother disappeared near the Lobo Valley. No body was found, just drag marks in the sand and blood on the rocks that told a story no one needed to read twice. The second was found dead 3 weeks later with bite wounds on his spine and throat. The killing method was efficient. Coalition males do not waste time with nomads. They isolate, they surround, and they destroy. The third and fourth brothers were killed within days of each other. Whether it was the same coalition or different ones, the guides never confirmed. What they confirmed was the result. 4 brothers who had been alive and walking together were now gone, erased from the Serengeti as if they had never existed. The grassland does not hold funerals. It simply grows over the bones and waits for the next generation to make the same mistakes. Bob Jr. was the only one left, alone. No coalition, no brother to watch his flank while he slept. No partner to roar with him into the darkness so that rival males would hear 2 voices instead of 1. A single male lion in the open Serengeti is the most vulnerable creature on the plain. Every coalition sees him as a target. Every pride sees him as a stranger. He had no territory to defend and no reason to roar, because roaring alone only announces your weakness to every lion listening. He walked south, then west, then south again. The guides lost track of him for months. Some assumed he was dead. Another son of Bob Marley swallowed by the same system that had built his father into a legend. The Serengeti creates kings and destroys princes with equal indifference. Then a report came from the edge of the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. A lone male with a dark mane had been spotted traveling with 2 young lionesses. He was thin, he was scarred, but he was alive and he was moving north, back toward the Namiri Plains, back toward the land where his father had built an empire from nothing. No lion returns to the territory where he was born. It is not instinct, it is not strategy. It is suicide. The males who control that land will recognize the scent of a former resident, and they will kill him faster than they would kill a stranger. A stranger might be passing through. A returning son is trying to reclaim what was taken. And in the world of lions, reclamation is war. Bob Jr. came back anyway. He crossed the open corridor between the Ngorongoro Highlands and the eastern Serengeti, with 2 lionesses walking behind him. They were not from his father's pride. They were nomads he had found during his months of exile. Females without a pride who had chosen to follow a male without a kingdom. 3 lions with nothing, walking toward a territory controlled by everything. The Namiri Plains had changed since his exile. His father Bob Marley was aging. Ziggy was weaker. The coalition that had once held 60 lions across 2 prides was fracturing under the pressure of younger males pushing in from every direction. The empire that had seemed permanent when Bob Jr. was a cub was already cracking at the edges. The timing was not planned, but it was perfect. He did not announce himself the way his father had. He did not roar. He did not march into the center of the territory and challenge every male within earshot. He moved quietly along the borders, scent marking at night, avoiding confrontation during the day, learning the new patrol routes, the new pride structures, the new weaknesses that had formed during his absence. He was not his father. His father had taken this land with force. Bob Jr. would take it with patience. If you have ever watched a lion rebuild from nothing, hit the like button right now. This story is just getting started. Then he found Marley. Some guides called him Trygve, a name given by a Swedish photographer who had documented him since he was 6 weeks old. But the name that stuck was Marley, because his mane carried the same dark, twisted texture that his father's had. He was Bob Jr.'s brother, not from the same litter, but from the same bloodline, same father, same territory, same genetics that produced dark manes and heavy frames and a refusal to die when the Serengeti decided it was time. The 2 brothers recognized each other, not through some romantic reunion that humans would write into a film script, through scent, through posture, through the slow approach and the careful circling and the eventual grooming that tells one male lion that another male lion is not a threat. It took days, maybe weeks, but eventually Bob Jr. and Marley stood side by side on a ridge overlooking the Namiri Plains and roared together. 2 voices instead of one. The sound carried 8 kilometers across the grassland, and every lion who heard it understood the message. The king's sons were back. Together, they were no longer nomads. They were a coalition, small by Serengeti standards, just 2 males against territories held by groups of 4 and 5. But they had something that larger coalitions often lack. They had coordination. They had trust built on shared blood and shared loss. And they had the one advantage that no rival could match. They knew this land, every waterhole, every kopje, every drainage line where a buffalo herd rests during the heat of the afternoon. This was their home before it was anyone else's kingdom. The takeover was not instant. It was methodical, pride by pride, border by border. The brothers pushed outward from the center of the Namiri Plains until the guides at Acilia's camp started noticing that every morning patrol ended with fresh scent marks from the same 2 males. Within months, the Namiri territory belonged to Bob Jr. and Marley. The dynasty had not ended with their father. It had simply skipped a generation of suffering and returned stronger. Within 2 years of their return, Bob Jr. and Marley controlled one of the largest pride territories in the eastern Serengeti. The Kibumbu Pride alone held over 30 members. Lionesses, subadults and cubs scattered across a stretch of grassland so vast that the brothers had to split their patrols to cover the borders. One would take the north, while the other walked the southern edge, roaring every evening to remind the Serengeti that this land had 2 owners, and neither one was negotiating. The territory was not just large, it was rich. The Namiri Plains sit on a migration corridor that funnels hundreds of thousands of wildebeest, zebra and Thompson's gazelle through narrow channels of green grass every year between December and March. When the migration arrived, the killing was easy. The lionesses barely had to move. prey walked into their territory the way water flows downhill. Inevitable, endless. The pride ate so well during migration season that the cubs grew faster than cubs in any other part of the Serengeti. Researchers at Namiri Plains camp documented the growth rates and confirmed what the guides already knew. This pride was thriving in a way that few prides ever do. Bob Jr. became the face of the Serengeti, not because he was the strongest lion in the park, not because he had the largest territory or the most kills, because he was beautiful. His mane had grown into a massive dark frame that surrounded his face like a portrait border made of black silk. When he walked, his stride was slow and deliberate, as if he knew that every camera within a kilometer was pointed at him. The guides at Namiri Plains started calling him the most photogenic lion in Africa. Photographers who had spent decades shooting wildlife across the continent said they had never seen a male lion carry himself with that level of presence. Tourists began requesting him by name. Safari operators in Arusha would receive emails from clients in Germany, Japan, and the United States asking one question before booking: is Bob Jr. still there? The answer was always yes. He was always there, walking the same ridgelines his father had walked, lying on the same kopjes where he had played as a cub, posing for cameras with a stillness that made professional photographers question whether he was trained. He was not trained. He was simply a lion who had learned that vehicles meant no danger and that the clicking sounds they made were not worth the effort of standing up. Chris Fallows, one of Africa's most celebrated wildlife photographers, visited the Namiri Plains specifically to photograph Bob Jr. He later wrote that watching Bob Jr. walk toward him in the early morning light was one of the most memorable moments of his career. He called him the Fabio of the lion world. The name spread through the safari industry like a compliment that no one could argue with. But behind the beauty was a machine built for violence. Bob Jr. and Marley defended their territory with a brutality that the cameras rarely captured. Nomadic males who crossed into Namiri territory were chased, cornered, and mauled. The brothers did not kill every intruder. Some they let escape with enough injuries to ensure they would never return. Others were not as fortunate. The Serengeti's eastern corridor is one of the highest density lion areas in Africa, and maintaining 30+ members across a single pride requires a level of aggression that does not photograph as well as a dark mane catching the morning light. 7 years. That is how long Bob Jr. and Marley held their kingdom. 7 years of patrols, 7 years of kills, 7 years of fathering cubs that carried their genetics into the next generation. In the world of lions, where the average reign lasts 2 to 3 years, 7 is not a tenure. It is a dynasty. Only a handful of coalitions in the history of the Serengeti have held territory that long. Bob Marley held his for a decade. His son was on track to match him. Then in 2018, 4 males arrived from the west. The guides had never seen them before. They moved in a tight formation, shoulder to shoulder, scanning the grassland with the focus of predators who had already chosen their target. The rangers gave them a name that required no explanation: the Killers. The 4 males came from deeper in the Serengeti, from a region west of Serenera, where competition for territory is so intense that young coalitions either expand east or die trying. They were between 5 and 6 years old, prime age, peak muscle. The age when a male lion's testosterone is at its highest and his tolerance for another male's scent is at its lowest. They had been moving through the eastern corridor for weeks, scent marking and roaring at dusk in patterns that told every guide in the region the same thing. They were not passing through, they were hunting for a kingdom. The first encounter happened near the Sametu Kopjes. Bob Jr. was patrolling alone. Marley was 15 kilometers south, with the main body of the Kibumbu Pride. The 4 killers appeared from behind a ridge and walked directly toward Bob Jr. in a spread formation that left no angle for escape. 4 against 1. The mathematics of lion combat are simple. 2 against 1 is dangerous. 3 against 1 is a death sentence. 4 against 1 is an execution. Bob Jr. did not run. Running triggers pursuit. Pursuit triggers the kill instinct. A lion who runs from 4 males will be caught within 200 meters and brought down from behind. Instead, he stood his ground. He lowered his head. He roared. Not a territorial roar, a war roar, the kind that vibrates through the ground and tells every animal within earshot that something violent is about to happen. The 4 killers hesitated. In the seconds they spent recalculating, Marley's answering roar came from the south, distant but unmistakable. 2 voices. The killers had come prepared for one. They were not prepared for the possibility that the second male was close enough to arrive before they could finish. They pulled back. Over the next 3 days, the encounter escalated into the most documented territorial battle in the eastern Serengeti that year. The killers probed from 3 different directions. Bob Jr. and Marley responded by staying closer together, sacrificing territory coverage for the safety of numbers. 2 against 4 is still a losing equation, but 2 experienced males who know every meter of their land have advantages that 4 nomads do not. They know where the wind carries scent furthest. They know which drainage lines create bottlenecks where numbers mean nothing. They know where the rocks force attackers into single file. Subscribe and hit the bell right now, because what comes next is something no guide in the Serengeti had ever witnessed before. The final confrontation happened at dawn on open ground near the river, where the grass was short enough that neither side could use cover. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. Rangers heard the roars from camp. By the time the first vehicle arrived, the killers were retreating east with visible wounds on their flanks and shoulders. Bob Jr. had a deep gash above his left eye. Marley was bleeding from his hindquarters. Both were standing. Both were roaring at the retreating figures with a fury that shook the vehicle frames. The killers never came back. The guides tracked them moving northeast over the following weeks until they disappeared from the region entirely. Bob Jr. and Marley had done what no coalition of 2 in the eastern Serengeti had done before. They had beaten a coalition of 4 on open ground and sent them running. The story spread through every safari camp within days. The Battle of 2018 became the moment that elevated Bob Jr. from famous to legendary. He was no longer just the most photographed male in the Serengeti. He was the king who could not be killed. But legends attract challengers the way light attracts moths. And the next challengers would not come in a group of 4. They would come in a group of 7. Every guide who spent time with Bob Jr. said the same thing. He had 2 faces. The one the cameras captured was the warrior. The dark mane, the war roar, the blood on his jaw after a territorial fight. But the face that made the guides love him was the one they saw when the cameras were not clicking. The father, the protector, the lion who lay on his side in the grass and let his cubs climb over his body as if he were a fallen tree placed there for their entertainment. Male lions are not known for patience with cubs. Most dominant males tolerate their offspring. They allow them to eat after the females. They ignore them when they play too close. Some males kill cubs that are not their own without hesitation and show little interest in the ones that are. Bob Jr. was different. Rangers at Namiri Plains documented behavior that they had rarely seen in a dominant male. He would lie still for over an hour while 3 or 4 cubs chewed on his tail, batted at his ears, and rolled across his mane. He never snapped. He never stood up and walked away. He waited until they were finished. One morning, a guide watched Bob Jr. walk toward a fresh zebra kill that the lionesses had brought down during the night. 14 members of the pride were already feeding. The cubs were at the edge, waiting for space. Any other dominant male would have pushed through the females and eaten first. That is the rule of the pride. Males eat first. Always. Bob Jr. walked past the carcass, lay down next to the cubs, and waited until they had eaten before he approached the kill himself. The guide said he had been working in the Serengeti for 11 years and had never seen a dominant male defer to cubs at a kill. Have you ever seen a lion act like this? Tell me in the comments which moment in this story hit you the hardest. His relationship with Marley carried the same quiet loyalty. The 2 brothers were rarely seen grooming each other the way some coalition partners do. Their bond was not performative, it was functional. Marley patrolled the northern borders while Bob Jr. held the south. When one roared, the other answered within minutes. When one was feeding, the other was watching. They operated like a system designed by the territory itself. No wasted movement, no unnecessary conflict. Just two brothers dividing a kingdom with the precision of generals who had been fighting together long enough to know exactly what the other would do without asking. The lionesses trusted him in a way that guides said they had not seen with previous dominant males. Mothers would leave their cubs in areas where Bob Jr. was resting, using him as a shield while they went to hunt. This is not normal behavior. Lionesses typically hide their cubs from males, not with them, but the females of the Kibumbu pride had learned over 7 years that Bob Jr. was not a threat to their offspring. He was their insurance. The Serengeti knew him as a king. The photographers knew him as a subject. The tourists knew him as a name to request on their booking forms. But the pride knew him as something simpler, safe. He was the reason the cubs survived, the reason the females hunted without fear, the reason the territory held together for 7 years without fracturing the way so many super prides do. But safety is a feeling, not a fact. And by late 2022, the facts were changing. Bob Jr. was 12 years old. His patrols were shorter. His roars were less frequent. The mane that had once framed his face in perfect darkness was thinning at the edges. Marley was slowing too, and 3 months before the end, new roars started echoing from the east. Not 4 voices this time. 7. The guides heard them before they saw them. 7 distinct voices roaring in unison from the eastern border of the Namiri Plains. Not the scattered calls of nomads passing through, synchronized roars, timed to overlap, designed to sound like a wall of sound that tells every resident male the same message. We are not one, we are not two, we are more than you can handle. They called themselves nothing. Lions do not name their own coalitions. The guides named them the Saba Bora Boys. 7 males who had been building strength somewhere in the eastern Serengeti and had now decided that the richest territory in the region belonged to them. 7 against 2. The mathematics were worse than anything Bob Jr. had faced before. The killers had been 4. Bob Jr. and Marley had beaten 4. But 7 is not 4 plus 3. 7 is a different category of threat. 7 means they can split into groups and attack from multiple directions simultaneously. 7 means there is no drainage line narrow enough to neutralize the advantage. 7 means it is over before it starts. The first 3 months was psychological warfare. The Saba Bora boys did not attack immediately. They circled. They roared every night from different positions along the border, forcing Bob Jr. and Marley to patrol constantly without rest. One night, the roars came from the northeast. The next night from the southeast. The night after that from directly east. The brothers could not predict where the threat would appear, and so they had to cover every direction every night. Sleep became a luxury they could no longer afford. Bob Jr.'s body was betraying him at the worst possible time. 12 years old. His joints were stiff in the mornings. The deep gash above his left eye from the 2018 battle with the killers had never fully healed, and now wept fluid when the temperature dropped. His ribs were showing in a way they never had during his prime. He was still eating. He was still patrolling. But the engine that had powered 7 years of dominance was running on fumes, and every lion on the eastern border could smell it. Marley was holding together better physically, but the strain of constant vigilance was wearing him down. The brothers had not been seen resting together in weeks. They were always moving, always scanning, always answering roars that came from a different direction than the night before. The Saba Bora boys were not just challenging them, they were exhausting them, draining the energy from 2 aging males the way a river drains a lake during drought season, slowly, steadily, without mercy. If you were Bob Jr., would you fight 7 lions or walk away and live? Tell me in the comments. There is no wrong answer. The lionesses sensed the change. Mothers who had once left their cubs near Bob Jr. started moving them to hidden locations in the rocks and drainage lines. The females were preparing for what they knew was coming, a pride takeover, new males, dead cubs. the cycle that every lioness in the Serengeti has either witnessed or survived at least once in her life. They could not stop it. They could only hide their offspring and hope that the new kings would not find them. By early March 2023, the Saba Bora boys had tightened the circle to less than 5 kilometers from the center of the territory. Their roars were no longer distant echoes. They were close enough to vibrate through the ground where Bob Jr. slept. The guides at Namiri Plains camp stopped asking if there would be a confrontation. They started asking when. On the night of March 9th, the roaring stopped. Complete silence from the eastern border for the first time in 3 months. Every guide in the region knew what the silence meant. When lions stop roaring, they start moving. The siege was over. The attack was coming. The morning of March 10th, 2023 began like every other morning on the Namiri Plains. Golden light spreading across the grassland. Zebra herds moving in slow columns toward water. The sound of francolin birds calling from the kopjes. Everything was normal except for the silence. No roars, no territorial calls, no sound from the eastern border where 7 voices had echoed every night for 3 months. The silence was the loudest thing the guides had ever heard. Bob Jr. was alone. Marley had moved north during the night to investigate a scent trail near the river. The brothers had separated the way they had separated 1,000 times before, 1 north, 1 south. 2 males covering a territory built for 5. It had worked for 7 years. On March 10th it failed. 3 of the 7 Saba Bora boys found him near the Sametu kopjes, the same kopjes where he had played as a cub. The same rocks where his father had rested after surviving the attack from the killers in 2009. 3 young males in their prime against 1 12-year-old king whose body had been drained by 3 months of sleepless patrols. They did not hesitate. They did not circle. They came straight at him from 3 directions and closed the distance before he could position himself against the rocks. The fight lasted hours. Rangers heard the sounds from camp but could not reach the location until after sunrise. What they found when they arrived was a battlefield. The grass was flattened in a circle 20 meters wide. Blood soaked the sand in patterns that told the story of a lion who had fought from every angle. Bob Jr. had not surrendered. He had not lain down. He had turned and fought each attacker as they rotated in, biting and clawing at a body that refused to stop moving even as it was being destroyed. A conservation officer named Friedi Shirima later confirmed the details. Bob Jr. sustained wounds to his spine, his throat, and his hindquarters. The injuries were fatal long before the fight ended, but he kept fighting. A ranger who arrived in the first vehicle said Bob Jr. looked directly at him in the final moments, not with fear, not with pain, with the same calm expression he had carried every morning when he walked past the safari vehicles on his way to patrol the borders of his kingdom. He died where he was born, on the Namiri Plains, in the shadow of the Sametu kopjes, 12 years old, 7 years as king. The longest reign of any male lion documented in the eastern Serengeti since his father. Marley was found dead 2 days later. Separate location, separate attack. The coordination suggested that the Saba Bora boys had planned both kills simultaneously, splitting their 7 members into 2 groups to ensure that neither brother could come to the other's rescue. The same tactic that had failed when the killers tried it in 2018 succeeded in 2023 because this time the numbers were overwhelming and the kings were old. The news spread across the world within hours. Safari guides posted tributes. Photographers shared their favorite images. Chris Fallows wrote that the Serengeti had lost not just a lion, but a symbol of everything wild and untamed about Africa. The leader of the 3 males who killed Bob Jr. was given a name by the guides. Bob Killer. He now patrols the same territory. He sleeps on the same kopjes. He roars into the same darkness. The cycle continues the way it has continued for 10,000 years on these plains. Sons replace fathers, challengers replace kings, and the grassland grows over the blood and waits for the next roar. But the bloodline did not die on March 10th. Bob Jr. fathered dozens of cubs across 7 years of dominance. His dark mane gene runs through the Kibumbu pride, the way his father's gene ran through the prides before it. 3 generations of kings on the same land, Bob Marley, Bob Jr. And somewhere in the tall grass of the Namiri Plains, a young male with a dark mane is growing stronger every day. He does not know his grandfather's name. He does not know his father died on the same rocks where he plays every morning, but he carries their blood, and one day he will roar, and the Serengeti will remember. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Share it with someone who understands what it means to fight for your family until the very last breath. And tell me in the comments, what is a greater legacy? A kingdom that lasts forever, or a king who dies defending it? If you want to see another father who sacrificed everything for his sons, the story of Notch is right here. The bloodline never dies. It just changes shape.